So you negotiated a trade deal, a rewrite of the NAFTA. And by the way, that kind of trade deal should be rewritten every decade, couple of decades or so. Everybody understands that. It was a good time to do it. We knew a lot more about trade among these countries. And it really did seem to be an improvement. I thought it was an improvement. It should be an improvement. Now, the guy you negotiated with violates the trade deal he negotiated with you. What can you possibly do next with someone who behaves like that?
Well, first of all, we're a resilient people. We're a resilient country. So are the Mexicans. We're working with great determination. I think you had part of the Prime Minister's speech yesterday. Mm-hmm. It's a remarkable time. The Prime Minister is going to be stepping down soon from his post. There'll be a newly elected leader of the Liberal Party, which is the government in power at the moment, on Sunday. So this is really Prime Minister Trudeau's last period in office. And I think his speech yesterday, he showed enormous determination and clarity. And in a speech that he gave and was him speaking to the Canadian people and speaking directly to the president, he indicated that this approach that the president is taking is wrong. It is illegal, and it's also just wrong because it adds costs and prices to everybody in an economy on both sides of the border, in fact, all sides of the border, that has brought huge benefit to our country and to the United States. And it is possible to have a trade agreement that actually allows everyone to do better. And that's what we've discovered. And we've worked at it since the 1980s. So we are going to continue to work with the administration to try to figure out what is it about this agreement that he now finds so offensive, but also to understand that, this is the time for renegotiation is a year from now. 2026 is the statutory time, the time in law when we're supposed to renegotiate the agreement. And we are ready to sit down at any table and negotiate, but we do need to create some sense of certainty and fairness in terms of how we all treat each other. And that, I think, is what's been lost. The statements the president's made about the 51st state, the references to Mr. Trudeau as the governor of Canada, these are not a joke. They never were a joke for me. I always thought they were deeply offensive and really strike at the heart of what it means to be a Canadian in this world. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of people in Canada are stunned and then angry. And I think you're seeing that in the streets of Canada today. You're seeing a sense of deep frustration and deep anger. But I think the governments of Canada are going to continue to negotiate in good faith with the United States. And if it means going to a dispute settlement mechanism or to challenging the law in court, if that's what it takes, or we have to do that, that's, of course, something we can do. But I think above all, what we want to do is reach a fair and reasonable negotiation with the president and with his team. And that's something that we're still very willing to do.
My reading of the market yesterday, and reading of the market is always guessing.
Yeah, a little tricky. You get whiplash.
To me, when things got really serious in the stock market, when Prime Minister Trudeau spoke, because the market hadn't heard from him. They knew the Trump game. They'd been through the Trump game before. They didn't believe Trump. They didn't believe Trump when he threatened the tariffs the first time around, and then he paused them, for a month. And they never expected him to impose these tariffs. They expected another pause, and then they went forward. And then they heard from Canada, and they heard a firmness from the Prime Minister that was clear and solid and strong and determined. And that's when the market said, "Oh, this is real. Canada's going to fight back, and Canada has very strong ammunition here."
Well, I mean, first of all, it is the Prime Minister leading the country, but it's also all the premiers
yes,
working at the provincial level. And we have a highly decentralized federation where the premiers, I was a premier at one time many years ago. And so there's a lot of power in the provinces to do stuff as well. And there's a lot of frustration, and it's shared not only geographically across the board in Canada, but it's shared across party lines. We have representatives of several different parties.
This has been unifying.
This has been an incredibly, I wouldn't just say unifying, I would say galvanizing. This is something that is galvanizing our country with enormous determination. And so what the prime minister's announced is a series of steps. You do this, we'll do this. And that's painful to do because it hurts us as much as it hurts the people who are being affected. But more importantly, I think the issue for us now is how do we get this thing back on track? What is it that's really behind it? It doesn't seem to be the fentanyl because Canada's not a huge source of fentanyl. We all agree that we have to take steps to reinforce the border. That's happening everywhere. And we understand the need to do that. And that's being done. So what is this really about? And it's the sense that this is such a moving target that the prime minister, I think he felt, well, we just have to do what we're going to do. And we have to get some clarity from the American government as to what is it going to take for you to understand that we don't accept this. And we have cars and integrated industries you've described. We have resources of all kinds. We have manufacturing all across the country. And it will affect American customers. Potash, for example. We have farmers in the United States, in the Midwest. Planting season, I know it doesn't feel like it today, but planting season is coming. And when it comes, they're going to need a lot of potash. They're going to need a ton of potash. And we have it, and we supply it every year reliably and on good economic terms with no taxes and no tariffs. And the President of the United States is saying, well, there's going to be a tariff on that. I think these are all things that don't make a lot of sense to us.
Any change in your attitude now that the president in the last 20 minutes said that USMCA compliant products coming in from Canada would be exempt until April 2nd from the tariffs?
Well, first of all, Liz, thank you for having me on. I start off every interview with saying Canadians love Americans. I love Americans. Spent 20 years of my life. But in saying that, no, we're going to put a 25% tariff on electricity coming from Ontario to Michigan, New York, and Minnesota. And isn't this a shame? It's an absolute mess. He's created chaos. He ran on a mandate to lower costs, lower inflation, create more jobs. It's total opposite. You know, people are going to be losing their jobs in the U.S. and in Canada, and inflation's happening already. The market is one thing the market doesn't like is uncertainty. The market is going downhill quicker than the American bobsled team right now, and it's unacceptable. The situation he has put American families in, Canadian families, and around the world, it's just going to hurt. And as for the last interview you had with aluminum, the U.S. only manufactures 16% of their aluminum. A lot of it comes from Quebec.
When do you anticipate you will implement your 25% tariffs on the U.S. that you've talked about?
Monday. And I feel terrible. 3 great governors, get along well with them. Great people, and I apologize to the American people. There's one person to be blamed, and this is President Trump. You know, he said he's going to postpone the tariffs. Well, he said that before, and 2 days later it changed, a few days later. And I learned one thing: you touch a stove and you burn yourself, you don't touch that stove again. And 62% of our goods coming into the U.S., they don't fall under USMCA. What I recommend is let's sit down and hash out a deal with USMCA, and let's move forward. And let's create an AMCAN fortress, 2 greatest countries in the world. Unfortunately, it sounds like President Trump doesn't want to do that.
You know, I was in Argentina, in Buenos Aires, for the G20 meeting back in November of 2018 when the USMCA deal was signed with the so-called 3 amigos, the leaders of Mexico, the United States, and Canada. And we just want to replay what President Trump said then about the deal compared to the tension that we see now. Listen, and I'll get your reaction.
The USMCA is the largest, fairest, most balanced and modern trade agreement ever achieved. This is a colossal victory for our farmers, ranchers, energy workers, factory workers, and American workers in all 50 states, and you could almost say beyond.
What do you think happened since then? And he has been clear about the fentanyl crossing the border. Again, it is a very small amount in comparison to what's coming in off the southern border. But if you could go inside his mind as one leader to another, what would you think?
Well, first of all, he was the one who put this deal together, and he said it's the greatest deal ever. And, you know, President Biden hasn't touched this deal. So what has changed? And as for the border fentanyl, I always say 1 gram is too much, but we've put over 10,000 personnel on our borders. We have fixed-winged aircraft, helicopters, everything. But what he doesn't report is the hundreds of kilos of cocaine that we just apprehended at our border, just Ontario alone, the opioids, the fentanyl, the guns, the illegals coming across. I agree. Let's tighten up the border. And we have actually. We've really tightened it up. So that I agree on, but it works both ways. I've sat down personally with the DEA. Our federal RCMP, they're working hand in hand with our Canadian Border Patrol and along with the U.S. Border Patrol. We all agree. But don't use this as an excuse, because that's all it is an absolute excuse. He wants to declare an economic war on his closest friends, his closest allies in the entire world. It's not the American people. It's not the elected officials, because I talked to Republicans and Democrats. Not one Republican has told me this is a great thing. Matter of fact, but behind closed doors, they say it's a terrible thing.
Premier, it's not a great thing for our stock market today. They're not buying the latest news coming out of the White House of maybe some amelioration of this. So you say Monday you will put the tariffs on the electricity. We'll be watching all of it. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, and God bless America and God bless Canada. Let's get through this together. Thank you.
We're coming right back with the Treasury Secretary's warning to...
Folks, I know the stereotype is that Canadians are nice, and indeed we are. Sometimes to a fault. But the reality is we are very angry at Trump and his enablers. And there's already discussions of not allowing him in the country. Now, some of our more moderate politicians, and I disagree with them, I think we should ban Trump. I think we should ban him from the country. But there's discussions because, and I've talked about this before, and many of you have written it in the comments, like, isn't Trump banned from Canada? And the answer is yes, because as our police have made it clear, our criminal code makes it clear, our border regulations make it clear, people like Trump are automatically booted away at the border. If Donald Trump wasn't Donald Trump and he showed up at a border crossing, whether he flew in on the plane and tried to cross customs, come through security, international security, or he drove up in a car at the border and tried to cross, they would look him up, they would see his felony convictions, he's got no pardons, and they would not let him in the country based on the fact that he is a convicted felon. They would not let him in. Now, you can get special permission. Like if you get a pardon, your record's expunged, or you write to the government and you say, I'd like to visit Canada, please, I have this felony conviction, but there's these extenuating circumstances, they might let you in. Like if it's a non-violent crime, maybe it was like 40 years ago type thing, you're going to come visit like a dying relative, the government might give you special permission. But Donald, within this whole tariff fight, we keep glossing over the fact that this is a convicted felon. A convicted felon threatening Canada. A convicted felon who would not be allowed in the country if he was just coming on a tourist visit. And let's also be clear, a man who, in civil court, we got to be clear, in civil court, was adjudicated to be a monster to women. Look at what he did to Jean Carroll. I don't need to overrun it here. But he did, if that was in criminal court, years in prison. So, guys, Canada is being nice to Donald. He better not take it for granted.